Hello and welcome back to video 3 of the Butterfly Method. Joining us today is Dr. Eric Wood, ND, a leading naturopathic physician who studied at Harvard University's Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Wood.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you to everybody watching at home, watching on your devices.
Well, before we get started, I have to tell you, whenever I'm giving a speech or interviewing a big celebrity, I get pretty nervous.
And you're not nervous interviewing me?
But no, I mean, of course I am.
I'm just kidding.
But seriously, when I give a speech, I get nervous, usually in my stomach. It doesn't matter what I eat. Sometimes I can't even eat anything. Is that what you're talking about when you talk about the gut-brain connection?
Absolutely. This and this are intricately related. They go both ways in terms of communication. So whatever's happening here can affect this, and whatever's happening here can affect this. So if you're stressed out, if you're anxious, you're going to get a reaction down here, just like you experienced of that butterflies in your stomach, right?
For me, it's a bit more like dinosaurs in my stomach.
And that's just a thought. Now, if a thought can do that, imagine the other way around.
So you're saying if I have bad tacos and it makes my stomach upset, it's actually making my brain upset.
Exactly, 100%. There are physical irritants, allergens, all kinds of things that can bother us down here. Many things that people are routinely having in their lives. So toxins, pollutions, bad food, processed food, chemicals in our water, all kinds of things that are actually damaging your gut. And remember, we have a nervous system down here. So if they're damaging your gut, it's damaging your nervous system. And we can actually connect that to a lot of people's anxiety. So it may actually be a physical irritant or a problem that's creating all of the stress and the turmoil and the feelings you get with anxiety. So if we treat this like gold, we're generally going to have a good functioning mind. But of course, most of the time nowadays, what people are doing is anything but. And so we've got to start at ground zero, which is all about our diet.
It's always about the diet, isn't it?
It's always about the diet.
So if I'm trying to do everything I can to eliminate anxiety from my life, what kind of diet would you recommend?
Well, Josh, you're going to eat a diet of real food, like the foods we have right here: peppers, broccoli, bananas, tomatoes, foods that are whole foods. We can catch them in nature. They're real, like they look in nature, right? So a good guideline for looking for these foods is, can we pick them? Can we catch them? Can we grow them? Can we hunt them, right? Whole foods are the way foods used to be everywhere up until 75-100 years ago. And since then, our food landscape has changed dramatically. So people are no longer going to butchers and traditional markets and getting these real foods. They're getting corporate packaged products that are refined and not about nourishment. They're about profit, making the corporation money, right? Our ancestors ate real food. We need to eat real food. Our bodies, we can use the car analogy. If our body is like a Ferrari, you want to put high octane gas in that Ferrari so it functions well, right? We know if you put crappy gas in there, low octane gas, it's not going to work well. So our bodies need this fuel to repair, regenerate, produce our energy, etc., just like a car needs its fuel to perform well. So in the last 100 years, Josh, people have turned from this whole foods diet into a diet that is refined and processed, full of things like flavorings, additives, refined sugar. 152 pounds of sugar a year, by the way, is the average we're eating in this country. Trans fats, processed vegetable oils, refined flours, nothing that you would truly find in nature. And guess how much nourishment we're getting from that?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
What is a trans fat again? I never know.
Trans fats help those cakes, muffins, donuts, crackers, etc. sit on that shelf for 3, 6, 9, 12 months. Imagine your plastic inside of your food. That's basically what it is. Because to our cells, it makes the cell membranes more rigid and inflexible, which means nutrients can't get in and wastes can't get out. How good does that sound?
Sounds terrible.
It pretty much is.
You know what? That alone is giving me anxiety.
So in the last 100 years, Josh, we've transitioned from a whole foods diet full of meats, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, and we've transitioned to this, full of trans fats, sugar, vegetable oils. We've got some artificial colorings, artificial flavorings. We don't really see any real food here, right? This is all about convenience and might taste good to some, but it's certainly not about nourishment. And if you want to have energy, if you want to handle stress, we need real food. These kinds of foods are destroying our ability to handle stress.
So is that what you mean by ancestral eating?
Exactly. Some people call it primal, some people call it paleo. There's many different monikers being used out there. But whatever we call it, it's real whole foods, things that we can pluck and eat and grow, etc., that were real. We can recognize as real foods that give us nourishment, give us energy, etc., and not these refined pseudo foods that so many people are chowing down. Our ancestors ate little to no dairy, cereals, or grains, didn't use refined salt or refined sugars, and ate wild, lean animals and wild fruits and vegetables. In the last 200 years, our diets have changed dramatically, but our bodies have not changed in several thousand years. So we crave these real foods like meats and vegetables and fruits and whatnot, and not this.
Okay, I think I'm getting it, but can you give me some more specific advice on how I can follow the ancestral diet?
Of course, I have actually 8 principles to share with you today to build your plate, build your diet in this way of eating. So my first one is eat real fruits and vegetables. Okay, not hard, right? Pluck it, pick it, right? Second, have real meat. Real wild-caught seafood, free-range, organic, etc. are always best because we're getting more nutrients, less chemicals, right? We're going to get some root vegetables and tubers, especially if it's maybe winter months or fall months. We can try and eat more seasonally. So these are things like beets, carrots, yams, sweet potatoes, rutabagas, parsnips, etc. Great types of fall and winter foods, right? We can do bone broths or real soup broths, making our own, full of nutrients, nutrient dense. Fresh vegetable juices, fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, those kinds of things, full of good probiotics actually for us. And minimally processed whole grains, so quinoa, buckwheat, millet, which are actually seeds technically. They can provide a good energy source. They also have minerals and vitamins. Sprouting them makes them even more nourishing for us. And if you've got a good weight, you're not dealing with blood sugar issues, these may be okay for many people. So by avoiding the sad foods that we just saw before and having these real foods, you're going to give your body the nourishment it needs to fuel you, to take away those anxiety-driven triggers from our food and give you the nourishment that you need that's full of antioxidants, phytochemicals, vitamins, minerals, things that real foods provide and fake foods do not.
So I'm not a doctor, but my guess is, judging by these 2 items, you'd like to talk a bit more about foods we should be avoiding.
You got it. These are 2 of the worst ones most people have in their diets: refined sugar and refined flour. So these things together are causing lots of issues for us that are stressing our bodies out, right? Fueling anxiety, not nourishing us certainly. They affect what we call our neuroendocrine system, our system of regulation between our brain and our glands like our pancreas. So sugar or flour, if that turns into sugar, by the way, really quickly, it creates an imbalance by stressing things like the pancreas to produce more insulin or your adrenal glands to produce more cortisol, and it fuels these stress sorts of responses because your body is literally inside getting stressed from trying to balance this huge amount of sugar coming in without any fiber to slow down the absorption or protein and fat that give us cues to tell us we've had enough to eat. Stop.
So you're saying that putting these in my system will stress me out biologically, which will very quickly stress me out emotionally and mentally.
You got it. I bet you haven't thought that eating your Snickers bar is actually stressing you out. But it is from a biological, physiological standpoint. It's stressing that pancreas. It's stressing your adrenals to have to put out more insulin and cortisol and try and regulate you so you don't have a sugar high or crash. And the longer that happens, the more likely you will.
So your body is struggling to reach this homeostasis by throwing a whole bunch of more chemicals into your system to counteract these chemicals.
Yeah, these hormones, like insulin is what we call our chaperone hormone to bring sugar inside the cell so we can use it for energy. But when we have a huge influx of sugar coming in, much more than we can use at once, it has to somehow try and manage all of that sugar. And it's that repeated stress of episode after episode after episode after episode of eating sugar and sugar and sugar and sugar and flour and fat and sugar and flour and fat that we can't keep up with anymore. And so if we don't use the sugar right away, it turns into fat. And it stresses these glands out, and eventually they tire, they fatigue, they have problems, and we have problems then.
So when you eat sugar, your body's already dealing with that anxiety, so it's not going to be able to deal with additional anxiety. So essentially you're saying there's such a thing as a sugar rush in adults as well.
Of course it does. We pretend to ourselves that it doesn't, but indeed it does. Children get it, and they might express it more purely because they're not as compensated as adults are, right? Their signals are pure, they react faster, but we indeed get sugar rushes. We might experience it not quite the same way. We might have an anxiety attack after you have your big gulp. Or you might have weight gain from eating those Snickers bars, or you might not have a great stomach reaction, right? But if you have all this sugar, it's limiting your ability to handle more stress coming in, like driving on the freeway or your finances or whatever things that are stressing you out. You're already stressed, so you have limited resources left to handle any more, or the next sugar episode that's coming, for example.
I actually have a history of diabetes in my family, so I try to be pretty diligent about checking my blood sugar. So is anxiety actually an additional reason for me to stay on top of my blood sugar?
Absolutely. Anything that's going to stress your system out could be fueling your anxiety. So your blood sugar spiking and plummeting by having your sugar or flour can certainly add to that stress and fuel your anxiety or any other kind of psychosomatic kind of complaint you have.
So a few years ago, my wife and I tried this diet where we cut out sugar completely. And it was extremely difficult because it's everywhere, and sometimes you don't even know what they're calling sugar, so it's hard to avoid it.
Absolutely. They don't want you to find it, right? So they're going to hide it. They're going to relabel it, call it something else in your ingredients, or come up with a new label, right? So there's the 62, or every year it gets longer, number of names of sugar out there, right? Wow. So yeah, you bet. It's not just going to be called sugar in your label. It might be called 15 other things. So Josh, let's play this little game.
Okay.
I want you to find me all the sugar in this cereal, okay?
All right. Now, because of that diet, I think I'm going to be pretty good at it. There's sugar, obviously. That's one of the first ingredients. Corn syrup, I know, is a sugar. And dextrose. I know that dextrose is a sugar.
Okay, so you found 3. Let's see how many more I can find, okay? So you are right, sugar, corn syrup, dextrose. How about modified cornstarch?
I missed that one.
That's a sugar, right? Possibly natural and artificial flavor. That's a large catch-all. They can put pretty much whatever they want into that. Maltose and evaporated cane juice. So you found 3. I found 3, maybe 4 more. So we've got 6 or 7 sugars in this box. These companies are coming up with clever ways to label sugar to try and hide it from you. So you don't truly know how much you're eating because, again, do they care about your nourishment or they care about selling their product?
Mm-hmm. What are some other examples? Because I missed 3 right off the bat. What are some other names that they're using to hide sugar from me?
Right, so we've got 60, 70, 80 plus names in the marketplace right now that we can call sugar something else. So today I'm going to talk about some of these labels that a lot of people are missing and don't really recognize as sugar, but in fact, they really are sugar. So 3 of the basics we've got on a lot of products, which aren't as confusing for most people, would be things like fructose, glucose, sucrose, and high fructose corn syrup. Those are very common ones, not so shocking to most people, but are forms of sugar. So we're going to add dextrose, which we found in that cereal, maltose, maltodextrin, evaporated cane juice, evaporated corn syrup, modified cornstarch, malt syrup, fruit juice concentrate, date sugar, dextrin, diastase, diastatic malt, say that fast 5 times, ethyl malto, fruit juice, glucose solids, golden sugar, golden syrup, grape sugar, honey, lactose, mannitol, molasses, raw sugar, refiner syrup, sorbitol, sorghum syrup, and yellow sugar.
Try to avoid sugar. That's the key.
Try and avoid sugar, but also try and avoid those foods that are quickly turning into sugar, like flour.
Not bread, too.
Not all breads. But most breads. See, because the way bread is made, a lot of times they strip away all the fiber and the other elements of it, which actually make it more nourishing. So the more refined a carbohydrate is, the generally worse it is for you and the faster it turns into sugar in your body. So all carbohydrates will turn into sugar, but we want to get some good with it along with the sugar if we're going to eat them. So I have a guide and some principles to talk about and how we're going to choose our better carbohydrates according to the ancestral diet. So better choices according to the ancestral diet include quinoa versus white rice, root vegetables versus potatoes, paleo bread, which will typically be made from nuts or coconut versus white bread, nuts instead of chips, fresh fruit instead of dried fruit, and sparkling water instead of sodas. So if we have these kinds of foods instead of these processed, refined, sad foods, we're going to better be able to manage our anxiety, keep our biological stresses to a minimum, keep homeostasis, and in general feel much better.
Can you tell us some other ways to keep your blood sugar in check?
Definitely. I have a number of suggestions I give that are fitting for most people, which would include things like eating a smaller or moderate-sized meal. Every 3 to 4 hours for most people works. Also have some protein and fat with each meal. It'll give you the cue that you've had enough to eat. Now there are some exceptions. Some people do well with something we call intermittent fasting, which takes a break out of each day where you don't eat at all. But then you have what we call an eating window of time where you will eat regularly every few hours, but only for maybe 12 or 14 hours of the day. The rest of the day you take off. It gives your body a break to process and clear.
I always hear about balanced meals. Why is it so important that a meal be balanced?
Well, because different types of nutrients give you different messages, right? We don't get the message from a carbohydrate that we've actually had enough to eat the same way we would from a fat or a protein. So you need these balance of nutrients to give you the right cues, to tell you when you've had enough to eat, but also to give you the energy which carbohydrates are primarily for, so you can do what you need to do.
Again, I always hear about good fats. What makes something a good fat?
We're fat phobic still in this culture, but we don't need to be if we know what good fats and bad fats are. And this started a long time ago. This started before you and I were born, way back in the 50s with a guy named Ansel Keys. He did some research, looked at one particular study, and kind of came to some false conclusions and said that saturated fat was bad. Okay? That began the whole movement against butter, and it generated the whole movement of margarine because this wasn't saturated fats, right? We thought saturated fats caused heart disease. We're actually realizing now they don't. And so we've kind of done a 180 when it comes to fat, and we're realizing a lot of fats are actually really necessary in our diet to give us cues, to provide energy, to fuel our brain, which is, by the way, made mostly of fat. So we need fats in our diet to help us regenerate, to fuel these functions so that we stay healthy, we stay balanced, and we get the blend of macronutrients we need to optimally function.
What is a macronutrient?
So macronutrients are our big guys in our diet. So we've got fat, we've got carbs, we've got protein. Water is also considered a macronutrient. Fiber by some is also considered a macronutrient, which is technically a type of carbohydrate. So I go into specifics in the manual about which fats to eat and which fats to avoid, but this chart will help us right now go through some of these points that make it real clear. So fats, Josh, that I would suggest to include would include things like olives and olive oil, nuts and seeds, coconut, avocado, free-range meat fat, so you don't necessarily have to trim all the fat off of your meat. Eggs, the yolks are largely fat. Wild-caught fish fat. If some people are having raw dairy, have the real full-fat dairy, okay? And then fats to avoid would be things like margarine, trans fats, hydrogenated vegetable oils. A lot of the veggie oils that you see out there are pretty bad for us, including soy oil. Peanut oil would best be avoided for most people. Things like cottonseed oil, corn oil. These things are hydrogenated. They're typically rancid when we're using them, and they do not do us any benefits when it comes to your health or anxiety. So by eating smaller meals that are appropriately portioned and blended with your good macronutrients, you're going to balance your blood sugar, which is going to help stabilize your hormones, which is going to take the stress off of your glands like your pancreas and adrenals, which is going to take away the stressors on your nervous system here and your nervous system here, allowing you to feel better and manage your anxiety naturally.
What other things should we be avoiding?
So I suggest everybody wants to take a close look at their labels and really streamline any products and stay away from things that are full of chemical additives or artificial stimulants or sweeteners. These are awful chemicals that mess with our homeostasis and our balance internally and can create all kinds of problems, again, including anxiety.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Ever heard of MSG?
Yeah, of course. That's the stuff that's in Chinese food.
Right. But it's in other things too. It's actually everywhere. If you look closely at labels, it's in all kinds of soup products and bouillon cubes and all kinds of stuff, right? It's what we call an excitotoxin, which means it excites your neurons in your brain, right, to the point of damage or even death. So do you think that could make you anxious?
I'm currently anxious.
Yeah, your brain's anxious just thinking about it,
Yeah.
right? So imagine if you actually eat it. So that's one. Aspartame is another. So aspartame is a chemical sweetener, which is put in a lot of diet sodas and jellos and gum and all kinds of stuff, right? That can mess with your homeostasis, actually think your pancreas is getting sugar, causing an insulin rush, then making you want to crave more sugar. And some research actually suggests that it changes your flora, your good bacteria in your gut, to be more pathogenic or negative. So that's another one. Food dyes and additives, just like we saw in our trusty box of cereal here. We've got red 40, yellow 5, blue 1, yellow 6, BHT for freshness, which is a food preservative, right? So all these stress our systems out. They put burden on your liver to actually have to metabolize and detoxify them out from you. So that really means we want to choose foods that go bad, that are real foods, right? That aren't preserved to stay on your shelf for 3 or 6 or 9 or 12 months, right? And avoid foods that I call, my top 10 list of foods to avoid in this diet that are going to be full of these things, like diet sodas in general, chemically flavored drinks, a lot of the water, the flavored waters, right, that are full of Splenda or aspartame or some of these things. Energy drinks is another big one, right, that or like Gatorade or something else. Look closely and see what's actually on the label. A lot of times it's full of chemicals, full of preservatives, full of colorings, full of additives. Coffee concoctions, what I say, when you walk and you see in the coffee shop, people aren't just having plain coffee, right? They're having mounds of stuff piled on their coffee, right? Full of sugar and trans fats. So all these various kinds of coffee drinks, which are very different from real low temperature roasted organic coffees, which actually are associated with health benefits. The next one I would say is alcohol. There are worse and better varieties of alcohol, but remember, alcohol is a poison and it stresses your liver. So keep that in mind. Candy bars and desserts. This is kind of a no-brainer. Nobody really thinks that their Twix is, a good meal choice, right? So white rice, white bread, and refined pastas all quickly turn into sugar in your body, still stressing the pancreas, still stressing your adrenals, just like eating your Twix. A lot of chips, snack cakes, many snack bars, things like that, many crackers, and then a lot of conventional breakfast foods, which, again, I wouldn't call food, I'd call junk. So Pop-Tarts, again, breakfast bars, waffles, things like that. They're all sugary, floury, rich things that just turn right into sugar or full of sugar.
I never feel good after eating any of those foods.
And you never will, because they're not real food, right? Anything we put into our bodies has an effect on us. So whether it's food, beverages, or chemicals, drugs, medications, things people are taking, all these affect our bodies. They affect our mental state, our energy levels, and they affect our ability to absorb nutrition. All very powerful things.
So you're saying be conscious of everything we put in our bodies, even medicines and drugs.
Absolutely. Everything is going to affect you, what you ingest. So if you're having coffee, if you're having food, if you're having Tylenol, if you're having antibiotics, right? all these medications people are popping so commonly nowadays, NSAIDs, aspirins, Tylenol, Aleve, ibuprofen. I mean, how many commercials do we see for these things, right? They're to try and fix a symptom, but they create a lot of other collateral problems, including damaging our gut, which affects our nutrient absorption, creating reactions, and generally, these reactions are never good for us long term, and certainly not from a nutritional standpoint.
Dr. Wood, what about people who say, I've eaten poorly my whole life, I can't change now? People are set in their ways and just have the feeling that, oh well, the damage is already done.
It's never too late. It's never too late to make a change. It's never too late to start improving for the future. Today is a new beginning, so don't worry about the past. Start anew. It's going to start having effects on your body. You're going to start feeling better. It's going to start changing your mental state. Just like the butterfly effect, small incremental changes equal big results.